Hello, and welcome to Ready, Set, Cyber, an ongoing discussion around the issues and solutions in cybersecurity. I'm Josh Copeland, purveyor of unpopular opinions, professor of cybersecurity, and director with Quadrant Security, and your host for the day. Thanks everyone for being here. We're happy to have you. We've all heard about the hype. The experts from CISA to Microsoft, and even the White House are all shouting, MFA, MFA, all the time. It's the number one priority. It's the number one recommendation and often required component in a proper cybersecurity posture for any company. Despite the cries, there are some real pushbacks. After all, MFA is hackable, right? If MFA and all MFA is the same, how do they do it? Today, we're going to hear from some of the hackers, and we'll see just how bad actors bypass MFA and digital access asset and accounts. We'll also talk about some solutions and how we can better protect our companies and individuals against cyber attacks with the right tools and best practices. We have a lot to cover, an amazing lineup for our exciting show. So let's dive in and meet some of our panelists. First up, I'll let you decide which one of us is the evil twin. Is Matt Lee. Matt Lee is the Senior Director of Security Compliance at PAX 8. He's a proud member of InfraGard, a hacker, a student, a teacher, an internationally renowned speaker, author, owner of an epic beard, and father and husband. Welcome, Matt.
Oh man, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here, brother. And I think I have to pay by the word for that introduction. That gets rough. But I would certainly say you're the evil twin. I am ostensibly the good twin, just by the lack of the amount of gray. Wait, no, Gray was the good guy, wasn't he? Dang. Okay, I don't know.
Just talked yourself into that one. All right. Next up, coming to us from across the pond, where the national animal is a unicorn, Scotland. Ryan Moffet, he is a cybersecurity specialist with Integrity IT Solutions. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, we're all the way over from Scotland, so it's getting pretty late here, but it's good to be here, and thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for having me.
All right. We also have with us Chris Canfield from TraitWare. Chris is the Director of Technology, where he helped architect the world's first end-to-end passwordless MFA identity provider. He's also a professional magician and motivational speaker, so I am expecting some kind of sleight of hand involved in the course of the day. So
thanks everyone. Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks everyone for having me. Looking forward to this. These are some great minds here to talk about some good stuff.
All right. So we got the panel introduced. Let's jump in. Today we have the opportunity to take a real hard close-up look at cybersecurity, specifically multi-factor authentication, from various expert perspectives. So let's start. Each of you, in turn, give me a 30-second definition of what MFA is to you and how it's often described as an added layer of protection against unwanted access. So we'll go in reverse order. So Chris, give me your 30-second. What is MFA?
Wow, the basics. So the basics are something you know, something you are, and something you have, right? Something you know could be a password, something you are could be a biometric, and something you have could be a physical device, a key fob, something like that. That's the generic MFA, multi-factor authentication. It's a layer on top of something else. Usually we layer it on top of a password. It's an extra layer of security. There's my 30-second pitch.
All right. Ryan, what can you add to that? Give me some color context.
There's not really too much I can add to it, but it's just a second layer of authentication or a third layer of authentication. So something that you need to add to your password just to prove that it's you, whether it's phone number, email, authentication token, something like that. It's just, like I said, the extra layer to show and prove that you are who you say you are.
All right. Matt, you are known to be a robust speaker. What do you have?
I know. And you try to paint me in a corner going at the end of this, so I'm going to take a few seconds just to do that. But first off, I would say to understand who authentication is, you have to understand its parents, and that is IAAA, which is the identity, authentication, authorization, and auditing process. Identity, is that Chris Canfield? First off, the fact that we have to talk about multiple ways to identify that person and validate that they are them, which is the authentication part, blows my mind. Like, no MFA. I just want him to say, my name's Chris, and I'm great. I don't need an identity. I don't need a birth certificate, right? We do this in our modern day lives. Multi-factor says, give me multiple ways to know that's Chris. And then you have authorization. What should Chris have access to? And those things can be tied to stronger levels of authentication. If I need access to turn the nuclear key, I need a lot longer levels of authentication that need to exist for me to do that versus me turning the on-off of the water fountain, right? And so the point being is those are delineable. Multi-factor is just adding more ways to validate who you are, and are you actually who you say you are, at least by possession and other methodologies, some of those being identity-based, right, or biometric from something you are as a human. So I and A cannot be separated. That was 30 seconds, right?
More or less, more or less.
I digress.
So, let's have some conversation here. Ryan, are there any specific types of MFA that you consider particularly weak or particularly strong in today's environment? Is there something you'd say don't use that at all, or is there, instances where you might use a particularly weak MFA?
The weakest one I would say would probably be email authentication. So you've got your email and you send authentication to another email address that you might have to authenticate your first email address. It's one that I particularly come across a lot. I work with a lot of small businesses. As an MSP, we work with a lot of small to medium businesses, and people say, oh, we've got MFA, we're secure. You have a look, they could have a token MFA, but behind that, if they say, I don't have my Authenticator app at the moment, they've got their email MFA. So that's probably the weakest one we find, because if you have an email compromise, they're going to compromise a shared mailbox or another email from behind it. And it always seems to be the most prevalent one that we find as well as a backup MFA. So people aren't just using the mobile phones or multi-factor authentication tokens, phone numbers or anything. So the email one, I would say, is probably the weakest one out of all the MFAs you can do.
All right. So, Matt, you talked a good deal about the basics of cybersecurity, and implementing MFA seems to be one of those. Are there practical steps that you can give us as it relates to MFA, and maybe how that might tie into, the buzzword of zero trust?
Yeah. I'll try to represent our boy who did say in the chat that he's unable to make it. He was a little delayed on stage, so Dr. Chase Cunningham. But I would say that when you think about what is ZT from the approach of ZTNA and access from that network perspective, what we're trying to do in that is we're trying to use SPA or single packet authorization to take a number of things and decide should this person have access to this particular service or not, or this entity and person have access to this service or not. When you think about MFA is a lot of that part that can be, okay, was that Josh? Okay, yep, he signed in, he had his password. He had his password list, let's say, is the way he signed in maybe for this particular case. And we move forward and say, okay, now that's Josh. But is Josh on a company asset that's approved? Does it have the security? Those are attributes. Those are ABAC or attribute-based access control. So when we combine some of this actual front-end identity access control to say, are you actually Josh? Have you met those constraints? Is it the right level of authentication for what we're doing? Now are you on the appropriate device? Are you using the security constraints that we need in place for us to function forward? Those are those elements of, if I have all that information set forth first and now can allow access, then I've allowed only on that condition that access, right? And so I'm obviously bastardizing a way of saying this, but ultimately by focusing on the identity and then extending that into the other attributes we care about for the proper use of this data that might be sensitive or otherwise, right? We can now allow access only on those constraints, taking a zero trust first approach, right? And making sure that those are in place before we do it and only then. And quite ephemerally, right? If something were to change, we'd want to lose those things as well. So in my mind, that's kind of my thought of how MFA applies into zero trust, at least in the ZTNA type infrastructure, zero trust network architecture. Tell me if I've done terrible, Dr. Chase. I don't want to do you wrong. He was supposed to be here to talk about that.
If you did, I blame Dr. Zero Trust for not educating you enough. So let's actually dive in and look at a bad actor breaking MFA.
Yeah.
So if we Elizabeth to jump in and pull up this demo for us.
Yeah, this is one that I recorded a while back while she's pulling that up. I did this a couple years ago. I just grown my beard back after the beard shave. And anyways, it's using Evilgenics to steal a token that was not done with FIDO, and then demonstrating how to replay that. All right, we're now on the victim's box. It's basically just a private browser that I'm running. And we're going to go ahead and type in the malicious link. If you notice, it's login.login.inked.live / a little GUID that protects the server from a lot of scanners. We're going to type in and this is a lab account, so we're okay, our username and our password. And we're going to go ahead and do our two-factor authentication on our phone. And as you see, we start to see a session. We're going to say yes on keep me signed in. And if we notice, we now have an actual token session here. We're going to go ahead and harvest by typing in session 6. And we're going to go ahead and get the token essentially and copy and paste that and get it over to our attacker box. Moving to my attacker box, we're going to copy that cookie or token that we had before. And we're going to use a tool in a fresh, unsigned in Google Chrome browser. We're going to go to outlook.office.com. We're going to pull up the, see that we're not signed in. And then we're going to pull up the cookie editor, which is a plugin. We're going to import by just bringing in the JSON text that we pulled from that token or cookie. And we're going to import it. And you'll see it highlights those auth persist and a couple other settings saying, hey, I now have a token that replaced this information. That token is used and allows me to sign in and be you. Now, the bad part is business email compromises come from here, information theft, gaining access and pivoting comes from here. In this case, I'm just going to send the threat actor as myself to myself a message saying, hey, I pwned you, right? But threat actors would really do bad things and not good things in this situation. Matt, how can I protect myself? Well, you can use conditional access to shorten the lifetime of those tokens. Go to security, conditional access, create a policy called session persistence. There's a lot of other things we can do, and I'll just break down really quickly what happened there, because earlier methods of attacking MFA would have come from taking a password, username combination, signing in, trying to social engineer the other person into saying yes and accepting the multi-factor push, right? That's why Duo did the thing where they swapped around the accept and approve initially, right? Anyways, but the point is those earlier methods there. This is a method where I just have tricked the user into going to a malicious site. That site is simply a proxy that is running that traffic to Microsoft and is simply then in the middle, or AITM as Microsoft describes it, man in the middle, attacker, adversary in the middle, in that concept. And then I'm just harvesting the whole token. I'm literally just setting a Yarrow rule to hunt for this specific thing because it's that string. Thanks to Kuba Gretzky, whole bunch of folks that make that possible, that run that. EvilGenX Pro is available for red teamers everywhere. I just want to say that. But what this allows me to do is take that token and replay it. Let me tell you where that fails. FIDO. If you are using FIDO as a methodology, I cannot harvest that in the middle. Now, you can steal that token locally in the browser if I was ever in place and use those tokens potentially, but I cannot harvest it in the middle if it's FIDO in the way that it's done. Same thing with passwordless methodologies. They all ride on those similar architectures. So that is a method that I use to steal a token and then replay it. There are other things we can talk about. And my point is that the MFA is not all equal, Josh. There's delineability in that, and that as you have more sensitive workloads, I would certainly apply more sensitive protection. If that also makes it easier for the user, then winning. All right. So yeah. Anyways, continue. I'll shut up now.
All right. I'll put this out to the group. We all have these really cool devices that we use for MFA, whether it's an SMS or an application. What are your thoughts on using those as a methodology? I get a text with a code, or I have to go click into an app. Is that good enough MFA, or is that just, a placebo effect?
I'll take it for a second. I think we're getting there. We've done a lot of work in this area. I think we're getting much closer to where it's really, really viable. In fact, I would say it is viable. Certain folks are releasing stuff that is very, very strong. I think tying in, like you're saying, tying into the idea of FIDO, some sort of a passwordless based authentication method is the key. As long as you're doing some sort of domain binding, like you're talking about, FIDO makes sure that you are logging in only on that domain. You can't be tricked into going to a phishing site, because the FIDO protocol, other similar protocols, will prevent that type of thing. If you're doing channel binding or anything that's related in that sort of technological space, you're guaranteed to be signing into the correct website. The domain binding means you are bound to that domain. So you can't go to site with two E's, sitee.com instead of site.com, right? You don't have you might not notice it, but it's okay. Your authentication protocol, your token is going to, well, the authentication methods they're going to recognize that, and they're just going to say they're not even going to give you a chance. It's not going to work. It's not even an option. So I think we're we're definitely moving in that direction. I've got some other things we can talk about maybe later, some concerns with that technology. It's not quite foolproof yet, the way it's been architected and some decisions that have been made around it, some of these standards, but it's better than we've ever had it before, and the potential is better than it's ever been.
What do you think, Ryan? What is your biggest concern about some of these implementations of MFA that are out there?
Well, I suppose because we work with so many different businesses, there's not really a standard that's been agreed to on it. We've come across people that use multiple different types of MFA in their business, and we're just trying to get it across to them that it's not safe. So when we're talking about MFA and single sign-ons and things like that, the convenience of having a single sign-on would be better for MFA. It's like we're going off topic there, but yeah, we're just talking about the difference of MFAs like Azure, directory. Sorry, my brain's kind of gone here.
No worries, man.
That's right.
I'll say, to your point, Josh, and I actually kind of like got on this rhetoric train, and I'll be the voice of reason, at least in one piece of this, of saying that MFA versus not having MFA, and I don't care which one, is a hell of an improvement, even if it is text messaging. Phyllis Lee kind of went down my throat on that one. Great to see Tim Schnur. Love that guy. Brilliant dude. Okay, but the point is, as a harbinger of that first piece of saying something's better than nothing, that then said, it is going to certainly be better to assess your risk profile and use stronger methods that don't tie into things that are as manipulable as TOTP, right? As things where I can just get that one seed code and now I have it. Because guess what? The other factor is time and epoch time. Not all that hard to come up with that part of the equation, right? So as long as I have that code, I'm good, which means that's why that QR code works every time you scan it and put it in a different system, Authy or the next one. So I'm not a huge fan there. I also am a big fan of what you were speaking of down below as well with Ryan was SSO. CIS, the Center for Internet Security Critical Controls 5.6 says centralize authentication to a single place, right? Centralize authentication, 5.6. 6.7 says centralize authorization, right? As you get into 6.3, 4, and 5, those all say MFA, MFA, MFA. I'm with Ryan. You can't do that if it's not all in one place. And Josh, in my mind, text messaging wouldn't be my answer because those are manipulable with SS7 and other methods. I would say that I wouldn't go with TOTP preferably just because of just how many stupid things they exist. Let me get this one up and find that one in this list and put stupid. But I would say that passwordless, FIDO tokens as an extensibility. I think I have 5 FIDO tokens on my desk right now. And things that are attempting to use modern protocols would be my answer for both security, but also the user convenience. You know how many times I have to look through and miss that 30-second window for a code when I scroll up my stupid long list of TOTP codes?
OTP anxiety. I call it OTP anxiety. I don't want to get anxiety when I'm trying to sign in. Yeah.
All right. Talk me off a ledge here, boys. Sorry.
I will give you one that I have seen multiple times in my career where it's the push notification pops up in your app, and I've had users where they're getting spammed, where it's nonstop. They keep getting it, and they keep hitting no, and eventually one of two things will happen. They'll either get fed up and press OK, or they'll miss the button and hit OK instead of hit no.
Pager fatigue, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It is a real thing, and how do we handle those things? Is it just user training of when this happens, turn off your phone?
Some of that's also system design. Like, for God's sakes, don't let me just type in my email address and every time let me just redo a non-reciprocated authentication 100 times. Like, come on, you guys that build these systems. All right, I'll stop channeling my inner unpopular opinion. I apologize, Joshua. Every time I get around you, bro, it just comes out. It just comes out.
It's just the aura of unpopularness.
Yeah, man.
So, Chris,
yeah,
you're providing phish-resistant or virtually phish-proof passwordless MFA.
Yeah.
What makes passwordless MFA a better choice?
Wow, that's a long one. But the simple answer is this: humans make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. If you can't share something, if there's nothing to fill in, no blank to fill in, it makes it much more difficult to make a mistake. That's all we're doing. We're trying to reduce people making mistakes. That's
Yep.
how I look at it. Everybody's going to make mistakes. The more we can reduce the footprint to make a mistake, the better you're going to be. And passwordless is just reducing a big giant footprint out there to a much smaller plane to reduce that the footprint of where access can be gained, right? So if I can't share something, if I can't give something to somebody else, if I can't even get it off my device, if it's locked to my device like a FIDO type thing or cert-based thing, it's going to be locked down to you. It's really difficult. Well, we can talk about that later. It's not always impossible to transfer that stuff, but the more you lock it down, the more you, like I said, eliminate the human error, the better it is. So if I don't have a password, I have to remember it. I'm not copying it on a piece of paper or in a vault or here or there. It's much more secure.
It's an interesting part, Chris, and I'm sorry going out of turn a little bit on this
Yeah,
one,
go.
Josh, but it's interesting because one of the challenges with something you have is, and something is the XKCD comic with the dude with the pipe wrench, right? And they're like, hey, I've got all this quantum encryption, I've got all these things, and they're like, great, go hit him over the head with this pipe wrench until he gives you the password, right? Until he approves the push notification, to Josh's point. So when you start thinking about it, what I think modern authentication needs to start centering around is very possession-based and very extensible into something you can't force me to give you unless you are physically taking it from me right now. And if you can then put in preventions that make that harder, great. I'll take that battle line. I've got a 45 that solves that problem, no problem, right? And maybe a little hyperbolisly and too believing in myself. But the point being is, I think that draws the battle line better. Because think what's happening in those other push notifications, Josh. They've got the password, or the system's designed where all you have to do is put in the email address and then it sends the push notification for you to approve, right? Like that goes away. I have to scan something that I have to already have in possession that will know what that thing does and then have it do something, right? Like, Chris, that's what I'm dreaming of in a world where authentication starts to drive towards that possession-based and even possession on origin before the I side of it. Like, what's happening in FIDO? I'm also the I and the A. When I plop that in, it says, here's the email address that I have I have an identity for. That's it. It's the I, then the A. So you're removing that I extensibility out to the world. So I'll get off my pulpit here on this one before I fall and break my neck. But I will say that's what I think modern authentication looks like, is removing some of those attack surfaces.
I agree.
So you mean that as a bad actor, me going on the dark web and harvesting, used passwords or doing my physical pen test and looking for the sticky notes, that's not going to be useful anymore?
Much less viable. Much less viable.
So you've talked some of this about this and like kind of the peripherals, but biometrics, do they play a role in MFA's future?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
in a
sure.
different way.
Do you want to take it, Ryan? You want to talk a bit about? You probably see this a lot.
Well, yeah. I was just thinking, still on the topic that you were just on, just about the convenience as well of having the SSOs, again, multi-factor authentications. Biometric comes into the convenience part because, again, working with a lot of clients, a lot of them save their passwords to their Google password manager and the browser and things. So the credentials are already there if there is a breach. But when we're talking about the authentication that you guys are doing, then they can no longer save the passwords. There's no passwords to be saved. So there's nothing to be harvested. So there's another level of security there as well, where if they get breached once, they're not breached through everything. They've got a whole load of other portals they can't get in. I'm not saying they will get breached through it, but sorry, went off on a tangent again. What was the question?
So what role do you think biometrics might play into MFA's future?
Biometrics. I think it is the future. It has certainly a place to play as one of the next steps of authentication. So instead of having to sign in using pins or passwords and things, you've got face recognition or thumbprint or anything like that. It's just that extra level of security to say that it is you. It's quite prevalent everywhere now, so it's not a niche. Everybody's phone has it.
It's not just that. I mean, a lot of comments coming in the chat about this. I think I think Matt just said it's better to authenticate to an identity before an identity can be used to authenticate, right? At least know that I'm me, to that identity that I'm possessing, right? Great call out. And I think that goes to biometrics. But I think the point is, like, I go to an airport, right? And nationally now, there's a picture taken. And that picture is
Mm-hmm.
used ephemerally, they say, that's gone, to check against one they have on your driver's license or your passport or other things. And they're checking that, just facial structure. Do the eyes still, is one cock eye still pointing over here in my case, right, I imagine? But those type of things are validated. Those are being validated as biometrics. They are something you are. Now, they are something you are while dead, unfortunately, at least for a period of time. They are something you are from a fingerprint while dead as a period of time. So I think there's a biometrics aspect that then gets into a very low likelihood use that someone's taking my cold dead fingers and putting them on a phone, right? So like we're in this 1%er range. So I think biometrics are a fantastic step forward to remove that. And one of the things to the convenience that we were speaking about just a minute ago is I like to say, and I think I stole this from Chris Krebs, so I don't want to like steal and not give attribution, but our job is to make it easier for users to do the right thing and harder for them to do the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that Ryan spoke towards around convenience of SSO and extensibility, biometrics playing a large part in how I identify myself to that SSO that I'm going to use extensively in other software and other services, but making that convenient for me, making it where it just works. I don't have a password to remember. The other thing I'll call out that you brought up as well, Ryan, is that CIS 5.2 says use unique passwords, right? Well, it is definitely unique if there's only one of them, and even more unique if there's nones of them. Right? And so at some point you start seeing that my uniqueness is literally the uniqueness of the structure of my face and the way that my body was born by genetics. And that does start to come into a play. And I think the more we measure that combined with heuristics, things of the way someone behaves when they're doing something that changes, right? It sucks if you have a stroke, but at least up till that point, the heuristics are a fantastic additional piece to add. Chris, I know.
Yeah, behavioral biometrics. I was going to say that. Yeah, I was going to say behavioral biometrics on top of just the standard stuff we're used to, fingerprints and faces or irises.
How does
or that
Matt
kind
move
of
his
thing.
finger? I always click right here in the middle of the screen first, and then move.
How do I
right,
hold
like
my phone? Am I left-handed?
Exactly.
Am I right-handed? Exactly. Yeah.
Till you have a stroke or an arm injury, as I'm going to do. So.
It'll adapt. It'll adapt.
So I think we all can agree that MFA is not only critical to security going forward, but it's the way that we need to do business. But why is there so much pushback? And how do you address the myths and potential hurdles of implementing MFA, particularly in the SMB market where technology and funding is always a question?
The glove box. It's the glove box rule. It's the glove box rule, right? Maybe you guys haven't heard this before, right? The glove box. We all have one in our car if we have a car. A glove compartment box. We don't put gloves in our glove compartment box, but that's what it is. That's what we still call it that. We call it that. What is it? 100, almost 100, probably 100 years later, getting to be there soon. The glove box rule. We're used to our patterns. We're used to what we do. People are so used to what they're doing, even if it's a bad pattern. We just get used to our bad patterns a lot, right? I think it's more of it is education. It's going to be a slow thing. It's starting to get there. People are becoming educated, right? They're slowly getting there, and I think making it more convenient is, if it's not convenient or easy to begin with, the barrier's really high. But I think all of our goal is to reduce it and make it like we've been talking about, make it super easy, but also secure, and that's the balance you have to find.
I have a thought. I'm gonna have to channel again my inner Joshua Copeland. Unfortunately, I don't disagree with you at all on that statement of some of the factors of the glove box, the fact that we've always had a password. I think there's an alternate play playing out as well, though, right? When you talk about brownfield opportunity and brownfield existing infrastructure, I think there's a lot of people that just have a lot of technical debt. And I think the more the technical debt, the more the systems can't do types of things. I mean, right? Or you have to add on additional layers on top of it to make it function. I'm looking at you using a Microsoft or Cloudflare tunnel to put an identity in front of this asset that then still has to be authenticated with that crappy authentication method behind that, but at least adds that layer of ZT, versus people that are just identity, SSO, SaaS consuming entities or function platform consuming entities. Those people have a much different world in front of them. They can go there instantly, and I think that experience becomes so much better then than if you have the experience of, we added MFA, and then you still have to put in that stupid credential to that blue screen thing that we use that's on a terminal emulator, right? Like that stuff, that experience plays in a lot, but it's getting less, Chris. I think less and less we have this brownfield tech, especially in the SMB. I think less and less we have that. I think more and more, and think about it yourself. I'll give you a great anecdote. How many of you have clicked on sign in with Microsoft or sign in with Google? That is SSO. You have set up an SSO establishment between those two, and maybe Facebook if you've used Facebook for that. But anyways, the point is, I believe that it's not just the factor of who moved my cheese and the glove box component, but it's also genuinely, some people have to use crappy technology. And that has an even higher point where it makes MFA feel worse than what it would have been if it was just replacing and making that the entire authentication structure. That then has nothing else to do afterwards. So
good points. Good points.
So Ryan, we've talked about, the whys and what the hurdles are. You work, directly with customers. How should an organization evaluate and test, one, what their level of MFA adoption should be, and if it's really doing the things that they want against real world threats?
So first of all, again, when we're talking about MFA, we want to make it convenient. We still have some people of a generation that don't like technology, and as soon as you give them 5 portals to log in, they've got a token to do with 30-second resets. They don't want to have anything to do with it. So we have to educate them and all the staff on why you need MFA, how to correctly use it, and how to identify basically phishing emails, things like that. If they do come in, you still might get asked for your MFA. What portals are you using? Don't use it for things like that. So we need to, in a business sense, it's tricky because all businesses work different. So they need to create an evaluation for themselves and what's important for them. We do go in and test. We try and tell them we don't want to use email MFA, but some people refuse to use the work phones or personal mobiles for work purposes. Again, I don't know how it works for you guys, but over here, you're well within your rights to say it's not a work mobile, so we're not using it. So you have to come around it with text or email-based authentication. You have to try and work with the risks on that. Obviously, we try with SaaS solutions to put Azure. Still can't remember the word I'm looking for. You link Azure, so your laptop.
Azure Active Directory joined, ADJ?
Yeah.
And
we try
Windows Hello?
Yeah. We try and Azure join all the devices, phones, everything like that. We put in conditional access. So there are a lot of features you can do when you're talking about like 365 to strengthen the security of your multi-factor authentication and resistance to being tricked. As far as evaluating it goes, we have done things where a bit embarrassing, but we were meant to run a demo, but I couldn't get the evil jinx to work. But we would run tests like that. We would run phishing campaigns and everything just to keep people aware, because it is the users. MFA is all about the user, really. So we're trying to make them understand, them learn for themselves on how to use it, when we should apply it to everything, really. But I'd say the biggest thing is user training and evaluation. We can go in and do man-in-the-middle attacks. We can take a Wi-Fi pineapple and Wireshark and see what we can get. But it's ever evolving, so mostly user training at this point, I would say.
All right. So I want to double click on something that Matt kind of hinted at around the idea of continuous or adaptive authentication. Is it a viable replacement to MFA, or is it something that you're going to do in addition to MFA, or does it actually evolve into part of MFA? Anyone?
So, all right. It's more that we're still talking about MFA. What are we talking about? We're talking about, I don't know if I can cuss on this particular channel. We're talking about freaking authenticating somebody. We're talking about knowing whether that's somebody. And when that transiently changes, it is no longer that somebody. That might be WEBA or user behavior analytics. That may be all kinds of things. Josh, to answer your question more directly, I think it is another attribute. I think the things we're talking about, and the things we're talking about with continuous evaluation specifically, is constantly monitoring those attributes. Constantly monitoring that those things have not delta, that I didn't have this token that was all of a sudden playing this one browser context, and now it's playing in a different browser context, right? Or it's moved from Edge to Chrome in a different IP address, and like, is that normal? And those continuous evaluations become part of, in my mind, zero trust, of saying, in my mind, trust but only ephemerally, right? And that ephemerality meaning that it may change, it may go away, my trust may stop existing. And that is the nature of trust, right? We only trust based on the basis of data we've absorbed thus far. we actually don't have trust that extends forever. And so the point is, to your question, Josh, I think the way we apply continuous evaluation, continuously looking at new variables changes, did that machine all of a sudden go out of date? Did it start disencrypting its drive? Did Matt start behaving differently? Those things should be things that are part of the element of inspection of continuous authentication. In the past, we'd assumed authenticate once, they're in, they're trusted. But I could be paid $1 million to steal stuff from you. I'm authenticated, I'm validated as Matt, am I trusted? I think there are things that come to play in where we need to start thinking about the way we approach data in a more continuous behavior understanding and a continuous risk analysis basis. And that lends towards that continuous evaluation of our token lifetimes, to continuous evaluation. Maybe it makes me sign in with an additional factor that I didn't use last time because it didn't pass this first thing, or right, however we try to approach it. All right, I'll shut up now. But
I have a thought. I think language tells us a lot about where we are. So the fact that we're still saying multi-factor authentication, the fact that we're still treating it as a separate thing instead of just saying authentication and understanding that authentication is just authentication should already include all of those things. So if we're delineating the two, that says a lot about where we are, I think, right? So I agree. I think we're going towards, continuous behavioral, all these things are going to be combined, and it's just going to be eventually, it's going to be called authentication, and will be assumed and known that of course we're doing all these things. Of course we're not just using a password plus a band-aid. We're doing all these other things, and it's going to be inherent in everything that we do in all of our authentications, again, continuously, throughout the life cycle of that user and that user experience, the user journey, all those things.
So has regulatory compliance frameworks improved or hindered the adoption of more advanced MFA techniques? Are we creating a thing saying this is what the standard is and that's all you have to meet, or are we incentivizing being more technologically advanced?
In my experience, it's actually worse than either of those options. They say it says have 8 characters or 14 characters, and you don't have a password. You have not met this obligation, sir. There is no password here that you're using for this account. It's only ID. So you see the legacy aspect of systems have to exist just to meet the need to meet the way the language is written for the observation of that compliance. Right, Josh? So I think it's actually dragging us backwards in some ways because the language hasn't caught up with the understanding of, I need you to show appropriate measures of authentication based on the level of sensitivity of data being accessed. That would be far better for me, and maybe I'm getting to shoot myself in the foot here, but...
NIST has made some progress, and they're about to update their authentication standard. I think they're shooting for sometime early next year. You never know with governmental stuff, but they're doing a little bit better as far as the authentication classes go of locking it down and making it clear there's different levels at AL 1, 2, and 3. 2 and 3 are getting a little bit more aligned, which is nice. They're letting you use your devices a little bit better. Clear about what kind of devices you can use and how they're locking down. They actually opened it up a little bit, made it a little bit more convenient to reach a higher level of assurance, which is nice. We're getting there, but the government understandably moves slow. There's a lot of players, a lot of things in play.
So with all of that, what do you guys think is the first step someone should do if they're going into their MFA journey, if they have not already kind of dipped their toe in a little bit to get them a little bit more secure than they are today?
Conditional access?
I'd start with identity layer, yeah. I'd get your identity layer sorted. Find that source of truth for who's your identities, and then extend that out. Ryan said this early on, right? Using conditional access, using attribute-based, using MFA there. Because then you can start packing in, where are my services not where they should be? I went the opposite direction when I first started as a practitioner. I got Duo, I deployed MFA by Duo everywhere I could. If it was a webhook, if it was coming in through SAML, I didn't care. It was all coming in Duo. But looking back now, I probably would go straight to Azure Active Directory and move things as central to my identity provider, my IDP, as I can. Is the way I would approach this personally, and then have that be where the MFA layer starts to exist. Things that are outside of that, I would try to either retrofit methodology-wise through things like Azure, Entra Private Access, other things that are out there in the community, so that I could get to one identity. Once I'm at one identity, now the way I MFA that becomes lineable at that identity and the same for all the services that we consume. right? I'm using one set of conditional access to craft the way that I'm setting access to QuickBooks, which takes maybe more, and then down to this other thing, which just mail might be only these things needing to be true. That allows you to craft a journey of higher elevation of to your point, Chris, assurance level of devices and the ways we're signing in for higher risk systems. But I'd start with the identity layer, Josh. Try to get my identity sorted is the first step.
Yeah,
Right.
I agree.
Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I was just saying I agree. Matt said exactly what I was going to say.
All right. Well, as we're starting to wrap up, I will go ahead and give each of you about 1 minute to give me, what is your final thought on the whole MFA idea? Where are we going, where we've been, and what's next? We'll go ahead and start with Chris.
Sure. where we've been. This is like the stair-step approach, and I recognize this like at least a decade ago, right? We start off with the username and a password. Well, we start off with trust. We just trust things, right? We trust things. We found out really quickly as humans that doesn't work, right? So we added passwords. So passwords protect things, and that worked for a while. Then we decided to add additional layers of that. MFA, right, became the Band-Aid on top of password, right? That's what we were used to. That was the next step. Then finally, then there was a middle ground. Like, okay, now we've got all these passwords and all these MFA things. Where do we keep them? Thus, the rise of the password vault, right? And that's kind of where we were there 5 years ago. Now we've moved into, okay, what's post-password vault? Where are we at? And that's becoming the passwordless, right? That's where the FIDO identity standard comes in. Other types of password authentication methods come in. And I think that is the future. The passwordless, again, the behavioral biometrics, continuous authentication, that's where I see it going. It's moving past that, okay, we're just going to layer on top of the existing old infrastructure to where we're going to just throw it all away, kind of start over and build up a new paradigm. Oh, thank you, Matt. That's so sweet.
And I'm telling you, and I see Vladimir's comment about interoperability and backwards legacy compatibility. I think that's only true if you want to live on that side of this chasm. And I'll say this here, SMBs, small to mid-sized businesses, startups, new companies starting, SaaS vendors, SaaS software vendors, all fall into a category of the one paragraph I got to write for this Zero Trust document that I wrote with the CSA-ZT working group. And that was, we wrote about 170 pages of guidance for enterprises of how to convert from legacy infrastructure to modern ZT, ZTNA using their brownfield stuff, like getting stakeholders involved, getting work streams flowing, or going from the perspective of having the right people involved to make sure we don't break things as we try to implement ZT. And I asked this dumb question. I said, okay, what if I'm a company that is identity-centric? They're using either Microsoft or Okta or Ping or Google or name them. I don't want to exclude anybody, right? And they're extending into SaaS applications. And if they're not a SaaS entity and they are a code-producing entity, they are using modern CI/CD pipelines. They are using function services, infrastructure as code. They're deploying things in modern ways using that core identity. What if they're that company? What do we have to do to implement ZT, ZTNA workloads? And a little hyperbolisly, we said, and I wrote one paragraph, they can ignore the last 170 pages of guidance and start workload by workload changing. And in my mind, I think, Don, to your point and Vlad's point, maybe I'm the idiot in the room, they don't all have to survive. The speed at which people on the other side of the chasm that are creating in this way can iterate so fast and can scale so fast from those type of things and build things with that type of consideration in play. Simply said, tech debt comes back to bite you. This is that moment. That's my argument. I think at some point the winners don't have to be the ones that are in business and have the mass today. And that'd be the argument I'd say. And we're at a very weird inflection point of that. Is that if you're in that first one, as we wrote in that CSA guidance, you could just go now. Every piece that bolts together has well-documented piece holes and how they go together, like for the most part. All right, anyways, I'll see myself out. But
Ryan, thoughts?
I would say the future is single sign-on and biometrics. When we look at 365 at the moment, we're still at the sort of security defaults level. A lot of people just turn the security defaults on, which is multi-factor authentication and a password. We can do a lot better. I still think currently 365 allows legacy MFA. I do think they're getting rid of that in January though. I might be mistaken, but you can always go further with that and do your conditional access, restrict it down to certain locations and things like that. And people are slowly getting better at restricting it down to just what they need. we tend to have a thing of, oh, we might need to go and log into my 365 in Spain or Portugal or somewhere like that. But if you do need to do it, we can turn it on at that time. We don't need to just leave everything open. So we are getting better at restricting what things we do just to what we need, and looking to make things more convenient with single sign-on, with biometrics, behavioral biometrics, continuous authentication, everything like that that's been mentioned. So I think that is probably the way forward. And in the next few years, you will see some big leaps in people moving to single sign-on solutions for convenience, and convenience drives everything as far as businesses, well, money and convenience, because as long as the staff aren't moaning, everybody's happy.
All right. Well, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thanks to our amazing panelists for their time today, for shedding some light on an important topic, and to our audience, most importantly, for joining in. As a reminder, this show is recorded and will be available on YouTube and on LinkedIn. Feel free to share it with all your colleagues, your peeps. If you have any questions, please comment. For myself or any of our panelists, please type them in the comment section. We'll get back to you with an answer. We're all available on LinkedIn, so don't hesitate to reach out. It has been our pleasure to have you guys here with us this morning. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And wherever you are, we'll see you at the next Ready, Set, Cyber. Thanks.